I think the first thing you got to look at is the blockchain trilemma, right? Security, decentralization, and scalability.
Yep.
So Ethereum, because it's apples and oranges to Bitcoin, they're trying to solve a different business use case, which is, smart contracts, business logic. They have a Turing complete layer one. They needed more scalability, so they had to move a little bit away from decentralization and security. Now, I'm not saying that they moved a long way away, but they had to give up a little bit there to get more scalability. Bitcoin will never do that because Bitcoin is doing something different than Ethereum. Bitcoin is trying to be money, and it is money.
Welcome back, everyone, to another edition of Insightful Principles. On today's episode, I actually have Lee Bratcher. He's the founder and president of Texas Blockchain Council. And what we're going to talk about here today is really what's happening on the forefront with the energy usage with Bitcoin mining, as well as just breaking down some of the actions that the Texas Blockchain Council is taking right now when it comes to the Senate Bill 1751, which is really just trying to help make sure that Bitcoin miners are able to get those certain tax incentives when it comes to the process of just mining Bitcoin. So we'll talk about all of that in today's episode. But as always, if you all just continue to like, subscribe, share this video, continue to keep sharing it with your family and friends, and that's greatly appreciated. But welcome, Lee. I'm glad that you're here on the show today. How's it going?
It's good, Kevin. Thanks for having me. I'm excited for the conversation.
Me too. No, I'm really excited. I'm glad we were able to, connect and being able to really have this conversation. But to get things started here, can you kind of just share a little bit of your background and maybe talk on what led you to actually starting, Texas Blockchain Council?
Yeah, that's great. So a couple things in my background that put me in a position to be able to do this. I was a political science professor at Dallas Baptist University. Before that, I was an Army officer. And so when I was doing some research at the Army War College, this would have been like 7-8 years ago probably, I was doing doctoral research, but I was also there at the Army War College at the Peacekeeping and Stability Operations Institute, which is a mouthful. But we were studying how property rights and being secure in your property rights can decrease the likelihood of conflict. And the property rights concept is very specific to institutions that protect property rights, whether that's real property, intellectual property, or what have you. And of course, in the West, we have really good institutions around that. In the developing world, those institutions are not as well established. So while I was researching that, I actually read the Bitcoin white paper. And I thought, this is a new frontier of property rights. This is a new frontier of property rights on in a digitized world, in the world of the internet. And so from there, I started to combine my research in property rights into Bitcoin and blockchain. And a couple years later, founded the Texas Blockchain Council and left my position as a professor to do this full time a few years ago.
That's amazing. Yeah, I definitely think property rights is a very important element of just the Bitcoin network. And when you think about how it really does give people the ownership of their property, so to speak, digital, property. And, I wanted to really touch on really how the conversations look when you're talking with politicians, when you're speaking with state regulators, what are some of the ways that you kind of help introduce Bitcoin or give people a foundational base of understanding what this technology is and how it can really benefit their specific jurisdiction or whatever city that they're particularly in?
Yeah, the first way to do that is through Bitcoin mining because it's where these digital property rights meets physical infrastructure. And so that's a very easy on-ramp for them to be able to say, hey, in your district, we have a site that was just constructed over the last 12 months. It's a large data center that's mining Bitcoin. It's paying taxes. It's employing, 50, 60, 70 people. It'll soon be your largest taxpayer, in the county. And that is the quickest way for them to understand what this innovation can do. And then from there, once they're interested, we can talk about the philosophical piece of it, which is, this new iteration of double entry accounting, this new iteration of ledgers, and then talk about the property rights piece, talk about the decentralization piece, sort of the macroeconomics piece. There's a lot of philosophical things in there that are hard to work with someone on unless you have them hooked already.
Yeah, no, that's a very important point. And I think, how you said that it's really connecting the digital property rights to physical infrastructure when you think about Bitcoin mining, and really how it's that introduction of people getting a better understanding of how it can help with just job growth, stabilizing the grid, and helping increase tax revenues. How does, I guess, Texas Blockchain Council really fit into that picture? I know you all do a lot of lobbying, a lot of education, going to these specific, going to these different, whether it's events or going to the state and actually, protesting on these different particular topics. How do you kind of help people be able to kind of bridge the gap of understanding how Bitcoin mining specifically helps with whether it's job growth, increasing tax revenues? What are kind of some of that data, or maybe some things that you talk about of how your group actually helps kind of facilitate that education so people can become more aware of it?
Yeah, there's two things in particular that we like to bring up. One is people think, oh, this industry doesn't really create a lot of jobs. And for the size of these facilities, they are somewhat correct. But when you actually look down into it and think, okay, maybe the data center itself doesn't have a lot of jobs, but there's security guards, there's plumbers, there's electricians, there's a lot of jobs in the ecosystem that was brought to the community, even though there may be only 8 or 9 people on any given shift running the data center. But there's probably triple that in the ecosystem of that's created by this facility. So 2,000 jobs, direct W-2 jobs in Texas have been developed by Bitcoin mining. 20,000 of those contract jobs in the periphery that are brought to these communities. And most of these jobs are coming to rural areas, rural counties like Milam County, Dickens County, Piatt, Ward County, all over the state of Texas. And when you talk about 500 direct jobs and several thousand indirect or contract jobs to a county, that can change the trajectory of a county of 10,000 people. I mean, it's absolutely revolutionary. It's almost like the reverse of like them losing an old manufacturing plant that employed a lot of people in the town. It's like reversing that trend and bringing it back. So that's what we talk about on the job front: 2,000 direct jobs, 20,000 indirect jobs. So if you combine all that together, and even these indirect jobs are like these contract jobs are paying more than the average, significantly more than the average wage for that county. So people are leaving their jobs as car mechanics or plumbers or whatever to come work and use those skills in the Bitcoin mining world. The other way that we do this is through talking about how Bitcoin interacts with the electrical grid. So what miners do is there's two things that they do primarily. They're a flexible load, right? So they're very price sensitive. But on the other hand, and this really gets to the 1751 piece in the bill in the Senate, they are in ancillary services markets, which is just another way. That's the complex way of saying grid balancing markets or demand response markets. So they bid in their load to ERCOT to say, hey, we'll allow you to control us. And they bid. So this is a daily process where ERCOT looks at these bids and say, all right, we'll take the lowest bidders. These guys, we're going to buy their load temporarily for the day. And if we need them, we'll tell them to shut off. Yep. And they have to, right? Because they've committed that to us.
Yep.
And by Bitcoin miners being there, they're able to bid the price down lower. Because if you just have a few bidders, the bidders can keep the price really high. And ERCOT is stuck to just pay, because they have to procure these ancillary services every day. So ERCOT's just going to be stuck paying a lot. And guess who gets passed on those expenses?
Probably the miners. The citizens?
The citizens.
Yeah.
The citizens. When ERCOT buys this, they pass on these costs to the citizens because they have to.
Yeah.
So if they can buy those for cheaper, then those cost savings are passed on to citizens. So that's really the piece. I mean, the New York Times article totally missed that. They didn't even speak to that.
Yeah, I noticed that.
So yeah, those are the two main things that we talk about.
Yeah, no, that's important. And I think what you had mentioned, as far as it really creates an opportunity for great reliability with these miners where they're able to shut off when demand is high and they can be able to storage energy and then being able to really get back on the grid or be able to mine Bitcoin when there's not as a high demand with electricity. And some of the things in the New York Times article, speaking on that you talked about that they missed, they talked about how miners are part of these called demand response programs where they're actually compensated when demand is very high, and then typically when that goes down, they actually resell electricity at a higher price. I wanted to know, is that an accurate, statement, or what are you seeing on the ground as far as with these miners when they participate in these demand response programs? Like, how exactly are they compensated? The article kind of said in certain situations they're not compensated, they can be compensated, and they kind of made it seem like it was a bad thing that they're able to be more reliable with their grid to shut off, which is an economic profitable decision to do so, but they kind of made it seem like it was something that they're able to resell at a higher value. But what are kind of your thoughts on that when you think about what's actually happening when you're working with miners, on a regular basis?
Yeah, there's a lot of nuance there that the article missed, and they were tripping over themselves and tripping over their own logic to try to paint miners in a bad light. That's pretty clear to everybody. But when you look at what the facts are, we want to shed light on the facts because the facts are going to demonstrate that the miners are positive for the grid. And here's a couple reasons why. One thing that they did not touch on is most miners don't have forward hedges. They didn't pre-purchase a block of power at a certain price for a certain a period of time. So they are simply just operating, and if they turn off and they haven't purchased ancillary services or procured those like grid balancing services, demand response services that we talked about, then they're not getting paid by the grid at all. They're just turning off because the price of power is going up. And that is a free market function of really the beauty of price signals. Price is going up. That means the grid is getting a little bit stressed. People are cranking up their ACs, miners coming down. That's what's happening for about 2/3 of the miners on the grid. Another third of Bitcoin mining in Texas does have that forward hedge. And they've taken an economic decision. They had a counterparty. They had significant amounts of collateral, and they posted that collateral and purchased a hedge, which really gives certainty to generators to be able to say, all right, we've got a hedge. We're the counterparty of this hedge. We need to be able to have this electricity. It just provides them with certainty. So those miners are able to sell back power to the grid. So if they've purchased a hedge at 3 cents per kilowatt hour and the power is 10 cents a kilowatt hour, they can sell that back. But what people don't understand is there's always the inverse of that. They can get margin called if it goes the other direction on them. So they took an economic risk, and just like Goldman Sachs, all the hedge funds that have power trading desks, they do the same thing. But they don't get excoriated in the New York Times for doing it, right?
Yeah, that's crazy.
So it is a unique thing.
It is a unique dynamic, and they kind of talked about how like factories and other hospitals, they typically, if they are wanting to whether it's to reduce their energy usage in times of high demand, they typically have consequences whenever they are making those changes. But I think, like you said, it's more of you have some miners that actually kind of hedge against that, and then you have some that actually aren't being compensated when it comes to being able to mine, being able to cut off during high periods of demand electricity. So that definitely kind of clears up what they were talking about in regards to that. But I did also want to kind of just get your thoughts on why do you feel Texas is and actually is working to become a hub when it comes to just Bitcoin mining, blockchain, digital asset innovation. I know we have a lot of renewable resources here, whether it's wind, we get a lot of sun. So that's probably one thing that I think about that can reason why it's favorable for a lot of people to want to start Bitcoin mining facilities out here. But what are just kind of some things that you're seeing as well on why Texas is becoming a hub for those different areas?
Yeah, Kevin, Texas is a pro-business state, so people want to move here anyways to do business. We've established that. We have an incredible workforce here, great universities, great community college districts, big, large cities. Several of the top 10 largest cities in the U.S. are in Texas. I believe 3 of the top 10, San Antonio, Dallas, and Houston. And so that's the number one reason, right? The other thing that speaks specifically to miners is the power costs. ERCOT's deregulated energy-only marketplace provides clear price signals, and it shows miners where the stranded energy is. If price goes negative, that means like that energy can't get to where it needs to go. Energy prices in Dallas might be X, but over here in West Texas, they're Y. And so 10 cents a kilowatt hour over in Dallas on any given day, say, but like on a day where there's a lot of wind, it could be negative, 3 cents a or I guess 1.5 cents a kilowatt hour is the most it can go negative. But that dynamic is a signal to a Bitcoin miner. I need to locate there because we're wasting energy there. If there's negatively priced energy, that means that energy is more than likely just going to waste. It is not getting to an end consumer. That electron, there's not enough transmission capacity to get that electron to a consumer in Dallas or Austin or Houston. So there's grid congestion. Let me locate on the other side of that grid congestion and help that. The reason why energy prices can go negative is because of federal subsidies for wind and solar. So there's a ton of wind in West Texas and a ton of solar popping up all over the state because we get a lot of sun.
Yeah.
So the federal subsidies for that, which are about 30 cents a kilowatt hour, provide the opportunity for those facilities to be built in places where it wouldn't have otherwise been economical to build them. And then sometimes they have oversupply of electricity when the sun is really shining, the wind is really blowing. The miners can soak that up and make it profitable, create jobs, tax revenue, and pay an incentive. Wow, I just turned this light off. That was awesome. Pay a premium for that power to the wind and solar developer, which changes their economics. So if you got a wind and solar developer that was said, hey, we have this 100 megawatt wind farm, and it's doing okay, the margins on it are okay, but a Bitcoin mine comes and locates next to them and doubles their profit margins, then think about the amount of capital that they will now have to build even more generation. And we want as much generation as possible in Texas. Wind, solar, natural gas, maybe not coal, right? But wind, solar, natural gas, as much, people who say we're going to go all to renewables, they don't understand grids, right? You have to have baseload generation. Natural gas is the best baseload generation out there. Nuclear is really good too, but there's some political issues with that. I mean, we would support it because we think it's safe, and it if you look at the data, it's safe, but there's like a stigma around it, right? But even nuclear, I mean, you don't want to put a nuclear facility near a big city because of the politics of it, the meltdown risk. You want to put them in rural, out in the middle of nowhere where there's really little risk of them having a meltdown or having a disaster. But if you do that, it's not economical because there's not enough transmission. It's very expensive to build transmission to where that would be needed. But what a Bitcoin mine can do is go out there and co-locate with a nuclear facility and say, hey, we'll buy your power for the next 10 years. And then when you get transmission built out, or maybe 5 years or however long, when you get transmission built out, we'll give you the option to sell to the grid if they're giving you a better price.
Oh, that makes a very good incentive. I definitely, see where you're coming from. And I wonder, would you say that's the main reason why you have a lot of miners going into West Texas rather than a Dallas or a Houston, because there's more stranded energy where they're able to capture that energy? And I know Ted Cruz has talked about like how in West Texas, they can be able to capture that flare gas and actually put it to a better use of producing Bitcoin. Would you say it comes down to it's more an economic value of going in West Texas where there's not as much congestion with energy, where they're able to either take that excess energy or look at other ways to try to profit, whether it's reselling, that energy? Would you say that's the main reason of why people are going to West Texas and places like that?
That's exactly right, yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I wonder, like, how do you explain, like, proof of work versus proof of stake? Because I've read a lot of things that talked about like, they is even in the New York Times article, they kind of said at the end that, one thing that Bitcoin can do is they can switch to proof of stake. And I know a lot of people have a lot of thoughts on, Ethereum, when you look at that blockchain and you look at Bitcoin's blockchain with it being more decentralized in nature, even though it burns more energy, you're getting a better value, or you're getting, I guess the way I look at it, you're getting a better output for the energy that you're putting into that particular activity. How do you go about explaining? Because I know from what I've read online, it's more of digital asset innovation. So I'm pretty sure you have conversations with both consensus. But how do you kind of tell someone, which one is going to have a better long-term value of how they want to go about, pricing their energy, within their facilities?
Yeah, I think the first thing you got to look at is the blockchain trilemma, right? Security, decentralization, and scalability.
Yep.
So Ethereum, because it's apples and oranges to Bitcoin, they're trying to solve a different business use case, which is, smart contracts, business logic. They have a Turing complete layer one. They needed more scalability, so they had to move a little bit away from decentralization and security. Now, I'm not saying that they moved a long way away, but they had to give up a little bit there to get more scalability. Bitcoin will never do that because Bitcoin is doing something different than Ethereum. Bitcoin is trying to be money, and it is money. And we don't want our value, our money, whether it's a store of value, medium of exchange, all the different properties, we don't want that to become less secure and decentralized. And so it's just a sacrifice that Bitcoin cannot make because of what it is trying to do. So those are the two things. I mean, it's not any better or worse. It's just trade-offs. And they're trying to do different things. So we'll let Ethereum do what it's going to do, and Bitcoin's going to do what it's going to do, and it's never going to move away from proof of work.
Yeah, no, and I remember reading the trilemma dilemma. Actually, Fidelity did their Bitcoin. They basically did a research paper. It came out, I think, last year, and they talked about this concept, which has been in the Bitcoin space for a long time, and it's just more of, like you said, the trade-offs is like, if you want more scalability, which what Ethereum is doing, they're sacrificing the decentralization or maybe the security aspects of that. Whereas Bitcoin, we're willing to trade off the scalability, which I still think there's a lot happening from the Lightning Network standpoint that still allows the network to scale. But I do think, like you said, it really comes down to the particular energy provider or the facility, what exactly your goals are. Are you wanting to, either be more on the side of being the most decentralized and secure, or do you want to trade, sacrifice that for more scalability, and just kind of figuring out where you fall along that. So I definitely think that makes a lot of sense. And, I wanted to touch on, I know your team, you're working together right now with the Don't Mess with Texas Innovation, which is really, I know you said recently you all had I want to say you were, I'm not sure if you were in Rockdale, Texas, but you had mentioned in a recent interview that they voted unanimously on Bill 1751, which is pretty much states that they're against any type of anti-Bitcoin mining, and it's really just trying to help be able to keep those incentives or keep the benefits that miners have currently right now when it comes to this Senate bill that's trying to get passed. Can you just talk about, what are some of the main takeaways in the Senate bill, and also what you all are doing with the Don't Mess with Texas Innovation?
Sure thing. Yeah, the bill does three things, one of which we're good with, two of which we're opposed to. The first that we're good with is it requires all miners to register as large flexible loads with ERCOT. We're happy to do that. We work with ERCOT on a daily basis through the Large Flexible Load Task Force. We want the miners to share more information with ERCOT. The miners want to share more information, and ERCOT wants it. So that's great. We're going to make that happen. There's another bill that is Senate Bill 1929 that just has that piece in it. And ERCOT kind of helped craft that bill. That's the bill that we're saying, hey, yeah, we support that. We want more communication. Now, 1751, the two things that it does that we're not supportive of is, one, it takes away the Chapter 312 local tax incentives, local and county tax incentives. We don't think the state legislature should be taking away a county's ability to give tax incentives to draw jobs in, especially targeting it at just one industry. So those tax incentives would still be available for any other industry. So it's a strange anti-Texas, anti-free market, situation. The other that is even more concerning is pulling Bitcoin miners out of ancillary services, like those grid balancing services that we talked about.
That's crazy.
So they're saying, well, why would we pay you to do something that you're going to do anyways, that you're going to turn off anyways? What they're not understanding is there's two situations here. Either the miners are not in ancillary services and they're going to turn off when prices get high. They're not getting paid in that situation. They're just turning off. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
So, and the other situation, ERCOT is paying them for the right to turn them off whenever ERCOT wants them to. And in that situation, they can't turn off until ERCOT tells them to. So the legislators are kind of, they're taking these two concepts and taking the worst of both and thinking that they're happening at the same time, when in reality, it's two different situations. So they're really not fully grasping what's happening in these ancillary services markets. They're also not fully grasping, or maybe they are, but we don't think they are. We think this is sort of an unknown side effect that would happen if this bill would be passed, is prices would go up for ancillary services, because you have fewer bidders, the supply of bidders go down, demand stays the same, price is going to go up.
Yep.
And that's just simple economics.
Yeah, simple supply and demand dynamics. And yeah, that's a big difference there, where you talk about how with those auxiliary services, if they're not a part of those auxiliary services, they're not being compensated to shut off. Is that what you're saying? And then if they are participating with ERCOT, which is the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, when they are a part of these programs, they are compensated if they decide that they have to they give them direction on when to cut off, or
and the key there is ERCOT decides.
Okay, ERCOT. Okay.
If the miner and these ancillary services are procured on a day ahead basis, so a miner could be in it one day and out of it the next.
Okay.
But if a miner is in it, they stay on even if the price of power goes beyond their break-even point. They just stay there waiting for ERCOT to dispatch them. And if ERCOT dispatches them, then they curtail. So really, they're getting paid for ERCOT to give up their right to turn off when they want to turn off. And if they're not in it, they're not getting paid. And they just turn off because they don't want to be mining Bitcoin when power prices are 20 cents a kilowatt hour.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I just think the ability for miners to be able to curtail their energy consumption, I mean, we've never seen anything like this. And I think that's the beautiful aspect of the network. Like you said, the free market elements where it's able to be able to know when it's time to either power down and be able to create more flexibility with the energy load on the grid. And it's just amazing to see how just the growth of the network. And it's just kind of crazy how sometimes a lot of mainstream media, they make it seem like energy is a bad thing. And when I think about it, when I think about airplanes, railroads, cars, refrigerators in our home, washers and dryers, you're going to get a specific output for the energy that you put in. So a lot of these technologies advance society because it allows us to be able to get to places faster, or to be able to have more comfortability in our home when it comes to washing clothes or keeping our food preserved. So, when people kind of talk about this whole aspect of, Bitcoin mining and the energy that it's consuming, what are some ways that you kind of, I guess, give people more insight on how to think about the energy? Because I think you're getting economic value out of the energy that's being produced. But what do you kind of say to those, or when you communicate with people that talk about, some of the energy issues that they tend to see with Bitcoin mining? What are kind of like your responses, to that?
Yeah. So what we do is show them the data around societies and communities that have access to energy, have longer life expectancies. Their human development index scores are much higher. Their human flourishing as a community is much higher. So while we want to be as efficient as possible with the energy that we use, the societies that have access to more energy are just more prosperous.
Yep.
And that is irrefutable. There's irrefutable evidence for that. So what we would say is, why don't we monetize? A third of the energy that's developed in the world is wasted. Fully a third, because it can't get to the right time or the right place at the right time, right? There's transmission problems, or maybe it was developed overnight where there just wasn't enough demand. It's a wind farm that's blowing at 2 a.m. and there's just not a lot of demand at 2 a.m. for energy. And that electron can't be saved. It just, goes away.
Yep.
It goes to its end source.
Yep.
And so that's what we really try to communicate is there's plenty of energy out there. Right now, Bitcoin mining is using 0.1% of global energy, which is pretty negligible. It's a rounding error for some industries. So to make a front page article in the New York Times of an industry that's using 0.1% of the world's energy, really, what it really is they're arguing that from an implicit bias standpoint, they're arguing that Bitcoin has no value. And therefore, even 0.1% is too much. Because global cattle ranching uses 10 times that as far as like carbon footprint.
Carbon footprint, yep.
But there's a lot of value to global cattle ranching because it's bringing us food.
Yep.
So they're essentially arguing that Bitcoin has no value and therefore we shouldn't spend any energy on it. What we would say is, well, first of all, let's start with the premise that Bitcoin has no value. And then once we've talked about that for a little bit, then the 0.1% is negligible in relation to the value that this is going to bring the world.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think they're not looking at the value or the benefit of Bitcoin and how it's solving a problem when it just comes to our monetary system and really being a decentralized network where it's no longer requires anyone to be an intermediary in a financial transaction. And I think a lot of people have a lot of challenges with that, especially the impact that Bitcoin not only has here in America, but globally, when you think about remittances with fees and different things like that, and how when you think about countries that deal with authoritative regimes, they need a form of money. They need a currency that is going to be more of a store of value, and that can allow them to not have their money manipulated like we see with the dollar and a lot of the things that we tend to see here in our U.S. Economic system. But yeah, I think those are all great, excellent points. And, I wanted to kind of wrap, this conversation by talking a little bit about CBDCs. I know that's been a very heavy conversation right now. The Fed is trying to create the Fed now, which is going to be launching in July, where for pretty much what I read, they're trying to move more of the physical dollars. I mean, not physical dollars. They're trying to move more of the digital dollars and eliminate physical cash. Now, this doesn't seem to be the CBDC, but it seems like this could possibly be maybe an on-ramp when it comes to eventually making that transition to a CBDC. What are your thoughts on just CBDCs and maybe some of the work that you all are doing to address the difference of what a decentralized monetary network is compared to, what we're seeing with the central bank digital currencies?
Yeah, if we study the history of money, governments have been notoriously bad stewards of money. Whether that's in the medieval times where the kings would add dilutants to coinage so that they could inflate the number of coins they have without actually having that much gold or silver, or even going off the gold standard to just a fiat system where these dollars are not really backed by anything. Eventually, in my whole lifetime, I'm 35, my whole life has been on a fiat system, right? But that's a pretty short amount of time in the grand scheme of things. Eventually, a fiat system will drive towards inflation, and it will drive because it's impossible to resist the urge of monetary expansion, of quantitative easing, of money printing, of increasing the M2 money supply. It's not sustainable for the dollar to remain the world's reserve currency if we continue on the path that we're on. And what we would say is we want the dollar to remain the world's currency, global reserve currency. We think that stablecoins and Bitcoin can be supplemental to that effort rather than detract from that effort. Stablecoins can lock more dollars up and increase the demand for dollars, and Bitcoin can create the more Bitcoin the U.S. has in our economy, whether that's through citizens or be incredible if the Fed or the Treasury, actually had a reserve of Bitcoin. That can increase investor confidence in the U.S. dollar, thereby lowering our borrowing costs as a nation, right? So that's not seeming to be happening, though.
Yeah.
So you asked about CBDCs. We're philosophically opposed to CBDCs, not because we're opposed to innovation or efficiency, but we're opposed to governments having full control over the monetary network. And the level of control that they would have is just unprecedented. And it's impossible for a government not to abuse that control. Now, they may not abuse it early on, but eventually it would be abused. There's no doubt about it. So that's just laws of human nature that we've seen throughout civilizations. So we see it being very quickly abused in China, right, with social credit scores and the ability to incrementally have negative interest rates on people's savings accounts or prevent people from buying things. So what we would say is, Fed Now is just a faster ACH.
Yep.
It's not a CBDC.
Yeah.
But you are right that it is a step closer to a CBDC. So we're not vehemently opposed to Fed Now.
Yeah.
But we are raising the specter of concern.
Yep.
Say, hey, we're all about faster transactions, and Fed Now is going to bring us that. That's great. But the real issue is, what are we driving towards? And they're clearly driving towards a central bank digital currency because it is more efficient. It's even more efficient than a Fed Now.
Yeah.
So what we would say is let's look to the private sector for stablecoins, and let's look to, because those are locking up U.S. dollars, right? 96% of all stablecoins globally are backed by dollars. Well, that's actually inaccurate. Are backed by dollar-based systems, right? So Tether is probably 60% dollars, some other percentage of treasuries and corporate debt and other things, right?
Yeah.
But what I mean is they're backed in dollar-denominated terms, and USDC is backed primarily in U.S. dollars. I think it's something like 97%.
Yeah. Yep.
So, and I think the rest is treasuries and other dollar-denominated assets. So what I'm saying is those can actually increase the likelihood that the dollar remains the world's reserve currency for longer. And that's a pretty unique innovation. And again, Bitcoin is this, we used to tie the dollar to gold for centuries.
Yeah.
I mean, gold is millennia where the gold was the store of value, the ultimate store of value, long before the dollar even existed. So Bitcoin is digital gold. It would stand to reason then that the more Bitcoin that we possess as a nation, whether that's at the federal level or in the hands of our citizens, the stronger the dollar is going to be globally because we have that on our balance sheet. That is going to increase other central banks' confidence in the U.S. dollar.
Yeah, no, that's a very important point, and I think Texas is definitely taking the leading role on. It's very accepted, on the state level here. I just noticed, like you said, as being a pro-business state, there's a lot of activity happening around Bitcoin mining and just blockchain technology and just the evolution of digital assets. So I think we're definitely in a great spot when it comes to just being in the heart of a city that is going to continue to keep growing in a lot of these different areas. I guess the last thing I want to ask you, Lee, is, what is the future that you're seeing here in the state of Texas when it comes to Bitcoin mining or just anything that people should be aware of on a lot of the activity that you're seeing with just blockchain and just mining in general?
So the future, we need Texas to remain the jurisdiction of choice for Bitcoin, blockchain, and digital assets. It's going to bring incredible human flourishing to our state. Jobs, tax revenue, entrepreneurs moving here. I mean, you can never have too many entrepreneurs, right? The more entrepreneurs you have, the more successful businesses you have. It's not that every entrepreneur creates a successful business, but you're obviously increasing your odds by increasing the pool. So that is the end goal for the Texas Blockchain Council, is to really see this industry coalesce here in Dallas, Houston, Austin, and even the rural parts of the state, because we have mining, right? One job in a rural area is actually a lot more impactful on that county than one job in Dallas or Austin, because of the per capita effect that has on the community. So we think that we've got all the ingredients to really be what Silicon Valley was for the age of the internet. We think Texas can be that for the age of digital assets.
That's good. Yeah, that's great. And, how can everyone just connect with you, or maybe even learn about how to take action with the Senate Bill 1751? I know there's ways people can kind of go online and kind of vote on that, but what are just some ways people can kind of take action on that?
Yeah, you're right. So don't mess with TexasInnovation.com is where they can go to send letters to their representatives and senators. Also call out a couple events that we have coming up next week at TCU. We're doing the North Texas Bitcoin Mining Summit at their Neely School of Business in Fort Worth. So we'd love some Fidelity folks to come out to that. The following week, we have our day at the Capitol with Satoshi Action Fund, Digital Chamber of Commerce, all these groups that we're partnering with, where we're going to hold a rally on the lawn of the Capitol with, of course, Good Texas Barbecue and a bunch of people out there. It's sort of like a digital freedom rally, if you will. So against CBDCs and for innovation, for this industry really being in Texas and developing here. So that's April 25th. So we want people to know about those things.
Well, thank you so much, Lee, for sharing that. And everyone, I will put his information in the show notes so that way you can connect with Lee. Well, thanks again, Lee. I really enjoyed this conversation. Really appreciate your time chatting with me here today.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me, Kevin.
No problem. Well, thank you, everyone, for watching another episode of Insightful Principles, and have a great day.